Yes. All right. Here we go. Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin. I'm the events coordinator at Square Books here in Oxford, Mississippi. We're so glad you're all here this evening. We are gathered here tonight to celebrate Gene Kwak and his dazzling debut, Go Home, Ricky. He's joined by Michael Bible. But before I tell you more about them, I would like to do a little bit of housekeeping, tell you about some upcoming events. So thanks so much for your patience. All right, so tomorrow, this is a local event. It's Backer Mountain Radio is back for another week. As a reminder, we are holding all these shows at the open air Old Armory Pavilion. So there's plenty of room for social distancing. You can bring a picnic. Please bring your chairs. We won't have them, but we will have the books. The book this week is called Tiny Oxford. So our guest author is, of course, Mississippi artist Lee Harper. And Tiny Oxford features photographs of her breathtaking miniature versions of Oxford haunts and locales, both past and present. And I recently learned that she actually got into miniatures as a Halloween themed treat for her then young son. And she kind of describes it as a macabre parody of the Christmas time elf on the shelf tradition. So she kind of run with that and just made these really incredible works of art. So again, that's Thursday, 10/28 at 6 p.m. at the Old Armory Pavilion. Musical guests include vocalist Kelly Hogan, and from the Decemberists, keyboard accordion player Jenny Conley, jazz pianist Bill Perry Jr. will also be there. And of course, our house band, the Yellow Bushwhackers, and host Jim Dees will be in attendance. Those of you who live outside of Oxford can visit our website for links to listen remotely. Then next week, Monday, November 1st, you can believe it's already almost November, we are hosting modern master, neo-noir, Oxford writer by way of Brooklyn, Bill Boyle. He'll be signing and reading from his latest novel, Shoot the Moonlight Out, which has been described as a haunting crime story about the broken characters inhabiting yesterday's Brooklyn. That's at Off Square Books, Monday, November 1st at 6 p.m. Because this is an indoor in-person event, you will need to bring your mask, proof of vaccination, or a negative COVID test in order to attend. You can expect limited capacity, socially distanced seating, and a really great night of literature. So I hope you can make it. Then Wednesday, November 3rd, we are back at the Old Armory Pavilion, still same time, 6 o'clock. We'll be hosting David Mcgee, who's kind of a hometown hero, man about town, and Ivan Maisel for their memoirs, Dear William, and I Keep Trying to Catch His Eye. Both are really moving meditations on loss and love, poignant tributes to their sons. It's going to be a really special event. And again, please bring your own chair and we'll have the books. All right, but moving on to the main event, Go Home, Ricky, a fresh satirical novel about masculinity and tenderness, fatherhood and motherhood, set in the world of semi-professional wrestling. So excited to talk about this book. I'd like to tell you a little more about the two guys on your screen this evening. Gene Kwak is the author of two chapbooks, Orphans Burning Orphans, out by Grain Ghost Press, and a self-titled collection from Ost Press. He has published fiction and nonfiction, both in print and online, in the Los Angeles Review of Books, The Rumpus, Wigleaf, Paper Darts, Redivider, Hobart, Electric Literature, and in the Flash anthology, Forward, 21st Century Flash Fiction. In 2020, he will attend the, maybe you've already done this, I guess, the Ragdale Residency, and he has attended residencies at Tin House and Yale. He teaches English and creative writing at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and he was a semifinalist for the George Bennett Fellowship. Go Home, Ricky is his debut novel. All right, and Michael Bible is the author of the novels Sophia, Empire of Light, and The Ancient Hours. He's a former bookseller at Square Books and a graduate of the Ole Miss MFA program. He lives in New York City. Thank you both so much for joining us. I've been describing this event as two spiritual nephews of Barry Hannah, and as a massive Barry Hannah fan. And fan of both of your works. I'm really excited for this conversation. Jean's going to kick it off by doing a reading the book, and those of y'all tuning in, please feel free to submit questions in the Q&A, and I'll come back and take care of those later. All right, guys, thanks so much. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much, Caitlin. And yeah, thanks, Michael, for doing this tonight. I'm going to start off, y'all, with just a quick little reading from one of the chapters later on in the book. I was trying to think about whether or not there was a chapter that would connect to Mississippi in any way. It wasn't really, but this is, you know, the parts of the Midwest and the South have some similarities. And so there's a section where Ricky goes off on this search, and like many trips, he has his false starts, and he comes across what's known in Nebraska as a Holy Shrine Church, which is like this giant glass. It's a beautiful glass and wood structure that if you're driving down I-80, you can just see. I've never actually like set foot inside, but yeah, it's just like this beautiful thing from afar. And obviously, you know, religion is pretty big in the Midwest and the South. So I'll read this short little chapter. Ritual is weird. We cling to it out of habit, fear, luck. I didn't grow up sipping the God juice, but you can't cast a stone in Omaha without hitting a bank or a church. So it's part of the Midwestern existence to catch some of the splashback of the Holy Spirit. Even if you aren't religious, odds are almost all your neighbors are. Sit in a runza, and nearly all the old timers will clasp hands and say grace before devouring their meal. Makes sense. We're the belly above the Bible Belt. I even attended Catholic school for my first 5 years. It was where all the neighborhood poor kids went. My first and second grade teachers were actual nuns, slap your hand with a ruler types. The older third graders helped us memorize our prayers by saying them with us, but I never gave in. They told me I had to recite them from memory to get baptized, and I said, no, ma'am, and sat in the back pews while the rest of the kids got their foreheads wet. I'm not religious, but when we all cross big moments, we revert back to our programming. I still say prayers and do the Stations of the Cross. What's a prayer anyways, but words on the air? I say them out of habit and in times of fear and luck. Now, this is all a ramble to say, when I'm headed on my way, I drive by the glass church and feel the need to enter. The glass church is actually called Holy Family Shrine, according to the official literature. It's a giant glass and wood structure that's visible from both sides of I-80, and it sits atop a hill and catches the light in a way that makes you believe in a higher power. I've driven by it 1,000 times, but never felt the call to get closer, not until today. Due to recent construction, I have to park over a mile away and then hike to the top of the hill. When I approach, I notice the hand-laid stones that make up the walkway to the shrine. Patterns cut into the rocks reveal a running stream that works its way underneath the chapel. The entranceway that you pass through is forged into the hillside, nature and man-made, tag team style. When I first step inside, a quiet young man with a tie on hands me a pamphlet that states the rules. No professional photography, and especially no drones. Dress attire needs to be respectful. I was actually wearing a cutoff Motorhead t-shirt, but pulled on a Husker hoodie right before I walked in because of the wind chill, and the dude must be a fan because he waves me on. The shrine or cathedral itself isn't that long, though it's tall with these cross-hatched wood patterns that hold the glass and bounce back all that light. I hear the trickle of the stream work its way under the stone and see how they've cut it to work with the church. It's quiet inside. It smells like earth. Looking down at the humps of grassland broken up by gray strips of highway makes me feel at ease. Certain times of the year, all that grass will get fried a dull yellow, but right now it's a dark green and a different shade of green. Clusters of cottonwoods also line the horizon, but the real side is the sky, big blue. I feel a little more lifted somehow, and it almost overwhelms me. The only sound is a stream of water underfoot. The man coughs. I want to ask for a blessing, but it feels insincere in the moment. Maybe it's enough I made it up here. Giddy in all this glass, I want a sign that I'm making the right move. I want to feel high on heaven vapors, or see a manifestation of yes in thumbs up shaped cumulus clouds, or a West Virginia specific outline in flattened prairie grass. I take a seat, breathe, and wait. Hear only water. Look and see the overseer scrolling on his phone. Is this the sign? Indifference? I feel less set on driving all the way to West Virginia, pedal mash to the floorboard. Something in me drops and I have to turn back. Right before I walk out, I scream, hallelujah, and immediately sprint back to my car. It's the first time I've run without my neck piece on, and I feel so damn free. I might as well be a stallion breaking loose across the plains. Wind in my hair and American soil beneath me. So naturally, I lose my shit and hightail it home. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, that was great, Gene.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, what just struck me about listening to that was something that struck me about the whole book, which is it's got this great pairing of lyricism and humor. And I think that's something that we both admired in Barry Hannah's work too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I just want to, we're talking a little bit just before we got on about your pilgrimages to Oxford and to Mississippi, but I'm curious as to how you found Barry's work and what about him inspired you. And I'm always curious to hear how people find him.
Yeah. We should definitely talk about, I mean, that's kind of where, we have this deep connection, right? Yeah, so I'm trying to remember the moment where I found Barry's work. I don't remember someone handing it to me. I think what had happened was, like, I was messing around as an undergrad, like, a lot. I didn't want to be a writer. I never like grew up wanting to be a writer. And I mean, when I was an undergrad, I kind of fell into it backwards. And one of the things I would do is I would go to my undergrad campus and get really high and then go to the library because nobody was up there. And we just had an incredible fiction section for some reason. And I'm trying to trace, I think there was some kind of connection between, like, the kind of romantic writings of like someone like Kerouac, which like a lot of young people fall in love with. And then I think I traced him back to like Thomas Wolfe and then Joyce, and there were other connections. And I think there's, and Michael, you'll probably know better than me, wasn't there like a story where I think Barry even fell in love with Kerouac and then like went to New York and I think he said some story, or I read some story that he wrote, some snippet, some anecdote where he said that when he was young too, I think he fell in love with Kerouac's romantic writing, literally donned a beret and like, and maybe a leather jacket and like went into New York.
Yeah,
Thinking it was like the 60s, but everyone's like, what the fuck are you wearing, bro? and like he realized the time had passed. And so I think there's just that, and like the line, and like obviously there's so much sentence wise. So I think it started with me just kind of tracing back these different inspirations and then coming across Barry and then thinking, wow, there's something about this dude's syntax and language and verve. And then like me and my buddy, like this book, and I said this on Saturday, we did a live event in Omaha. This book is my love letter to Omaha, and like about kind of just the wild pals that I grew up with, that I'm still around. And so, yeah, I just felt this deeper connection to his work,
That's really cool. Yeah. I mean, one thing that struck me about the book is it's wrestling is there, but it's backgrounded. It's really a story about family, and I think you're right too. A story about place. Talk a little bit about that, about how you found this like familial story. I mean, it also has a lot to do with identity, but that's sort of wrapped into this family story.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like, I think it's one of these things where we wite about, like, sometimes we can't help what we write about or what we're drawn toward, it just kind of comes up in the process. And so, I mean, I'm very close to my family. One of the reasons, I went to grad school, came back in 2011. And so it's been about 10 years now. And one of the reasons I came back, because I went to grad school in Boston, and a lot of people were like stuck around, and they're still there, which is amazing. It's expensive ass city to live in, I mean, you're in New York, right? But yeah, one of the reasons I came back is I'm so close to family. I'm like super, super close to family. And even during these COVID times, I've been super on like strict wearing a mask everywhere, primarily because my father has been pretty ill. And so that's like the one thing where I was like, I can't negotiate not seeing my parents because I'm super, super close to them. So I think it just naturally came up because, to be honest with you, in the early drafting, and I briefly mentioned this elsewhere, you're just figuring shit out. You're like having characters do things. And so in an early draft, it was just Ricky by himself in the car. And then I was like, all right, but what's he gonna do? Just fucking sit in a car and like twiddle his thumbs and, you know, just like be thinking all the time in his own head. And so I was like, that shit's gonna be boring. So I just threw his mom in there, and then it just became like a whole nother thing, you know? Yeah.
So, well, talk to me about the wrestling. Where did that come from? Were you a big fan as a kid?
Yeah, I mean,
From the
so I don't really know too much about what's going on right now. Like I kind of stay abreast of it. And part of, yeah, and so part of it's because the fandom of when I was a little kid, because in the 80s and 90s it was like everywhere, right? I mean, it's still really obviously very, very big right now, but so many kids that I know, or so many people that I know that grew up as young kids in the 80s and 90s, it was just such a I don't know, it was such a part of their childhood, you know. And so a couple of years back, my buddy Mike Young had this magazine, and I wrote a piece for him. It was about Macho Man Randy Savage, and I just had such a fun time writing that piece where I was like, damn, this is what I need to be writing about. And so I just thought I wanted to create a character that could be like brash and have this bravado, but also like it's kind of insincere because it's a persona, obviously. And so the real him and that version of him are constantly sort of like, you know, at odds or whatever. I mean, like a lot of us are, but I wanted there to be like an extreme between the sort of, you know. And so I mean, what better than wrestling, right? Like it's all like wrestling is almost more about the like the sell and like the yammering than it is like the actual wrestling. But especially in like the 80s and the 90s, you know.
right.
And so I was just like, that's it. That's got to be about the wrestling for sure, for sure.
Yeah, I find it's almost like, yeah, it's pure theater, like that great sort of physical marriage of like theater and like weird.
Yeah,
It reminds me a lot of like writing in a way, because you're
yeah.
sort of becoming the character.
Right.
And because it is like you have to improvise in it.
Yeah.
You know, it's scripted, but you're not a stage play or something.
Right. And well, and people forget, like people that maybe aren't into wrestling or were into wrestling and forget about how it's shifted. It's one of the sports that has like the core of what it is has shifted so much from like when we were young, because people forget that like in the 80s and 90s, there's this whole concept of like kayfabe, which means like presenting it as real. And if you
Right.
remember, like in the 80s and 90s, it was like presented as real. Like now, nobody cares. It's not a question of it. That's why they kind of repackaged it as like sports entertainment. But if you remember in the 80s and 90s, there was like a famous interview. Oh, shoot, I'm trying to remember what wrestler it was, but he was like interviewed like by like Phil Donahue or something. And he was like, is this fake? And the dude just like slaps him in the face.
Right.
And because it was so contingent upon like proving that it was real, you know. And so, you know, the wrestlers had to go around in their everyday lives and like do those voices and like really sell it even further. Now everybody knows like it's a persona, and that the you that's walking around in Whole Foods is not the same person that's in that ring or whatever. But back then they had to do that shit all the time, you know, which is like bonkers to me to think about.
That's something really interesting about having to maintain that verisimilitude. Like
Yeah.
it reminds me a lot of like comedy in real life too. Like
Yeah.
or fiction too. You're really trying to sell something. That you're trying to sell this character, like Andy Kaufman or something.
Right.
Right. And there's not too many things like that anymore.
Yeah, that's why I was like, it's like a perfect vehicle to write about. I actually like I put together a little list for Lit Hub, and like there's not that many wrestling books out there, you know. There's like a couple that have come out in recent years. Some of them are more about like collegiate wrestling, but it just seems
Right.
like fertile ground to write about. And yeah, it just hasn't been. But that's kind of like sports books in general too, you know. I think there's like a weird, I don't know, maybe literature considers sports to be unliterary or something. I have no idea, but like it just seems like they kind of shy away from sports, even though there's so much rich metaphor there and so much shit to talk about and so much fertile ground to sort of you know, unpack or whatever. But yeah.
Yeah. I think in the acknowledgments you mentioned Charles Portis.
Yeah.
You're a big fan of his stuff too.
Yeah.
Who are you? Like you, Barry Portis? Who are your other sort of guiding?
Sure. Yeah. And I kind of want you to talk about this too, because I want to, because I know, and we can even like kind of further extrapolate to even like films and art, because I know you're big like a film guy too. Yeah, I mean, just keeping it in the literary world. I mean, it's hard to say because I think about it almost as like different eras of my, I don't know about writing career, but there's like that early time where you're just like a sponge and you're just like sucking up what books are in front of you, or like I was doing, just trying to like go to the library and find different connections, or somebody puts a book in your hand. And so there are those names like Barry, and Sam Lipsyte, and Paul Brune, who I like came to later on. Have you ever read Auditorium?
Mm-mm.
Oh man, that is a weird ass book that I love. It's like,
Is
do you,
is that's Hob Bruin?
yeah. Do you know his stuff? Do you know his story?
I know of him, and I've read some stories, and I know his story.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
those things are hard to come by, right? Like, yeah, that's
I
not.
think so. I actually have 3 copies somewhere because I've just been collecting them like they're from
Yeah,
used bookstores.
they're very out of print. Right?
I'll send you a copy. Yeah, his so for the people that don't know, Hob Brune, incredible lyrical writer. He ended up, like, the short version of his story is that, oh shoot, I'm gonna forget now what he had as an illness, but he had to go through this surgery and it just got completely botched, and he was essentially paralyzed from the neck down. But his first book he published before that, and so Auditorium is like this weird languagey kind of wild romp. Like, it almost kind of doesn't work as a novel, but it's so beautifully written. Just about like this woman's baseball team and this like drunkard, and it's just so bonkers. You're gonna love it, Michael. But then after he had his surgery, and then he came to connect with Gordon Lish, the famous editor Gordon Lish. And then his stories after that are obviously pared back, not only due to Lish's style, but because he had to write, I think it was like blowing through a tube. Obviously, the sort of like technology at the time was so sort of basic, but he couldn't use his hands. And so I can't remember if it was like he was blinking or he was blowing through a tube, but he had to like, every single letter, every single word was so incredibly hard fought. And so he came up with 2 more story collections after his injury. But yeah, his first book is just like so different, so weird. I love that book. But yeah, and then inspirations afterward were like, then when I was able to sort of find my voice a little bit more as a writer, and then try to look for writers, and I'm like, these are the writers that I never got given in classrooms, like a lot more queer writers, a lot more like Asian American writers, even just like my contemporaries right now. Jenny Zhang's like Sour Heart. I love that story collection. It's like so bonkers, but it's about family. There's this writer, Anthony Viasnaso, whose story collection just came out this year. He unfortunately passed as well. But that's like an incredible story collection. So yeah, there's like all different kinds of, just like inspirations and influences. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, talk about some of your stuff too. Talk about some of your like inspirations and influences over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one I keep returning to is Samuel Beckett, and I always come back to his work, both the plays and the novels, and recently reread Malloy, which just as dark and twisted and upside down as it is just so fucking funny.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was over the pandemic. I was watching a lot of film because, trying to find a dark place and getting a projector. There's something about it at home that just,
Yeah.
I wanted the theater so bad. And
Yeah. Totally.
comfort. But there was this it's like a small theater down in the East Village here that was live streaming Happy Days, Samuel Beckett's Happy Days.
Mm-hmm.
It's about a woman who's buried up to her waist in sand. Mm-hmm. In the first act, and the second act, she's buried up to her neck in sand. And it was just fantastic. And I love the idea that these characters are like Job. They are oppressed upon by the world and shat upon, and their total existence is misery, and yet they are screaming to the heavens, "Happy day!" What a happy day! And there's something just wonderfully absurd about that. And I find that in this book too. And there is something that's sort of darkly hilarious about Go Home Ricky, and that I find in Portis's work and Barry's work and Beckett's work, that sort of screaming to the heavens, we're down in the ditch, but
Yeah.
I'm curious about so you're from Nebraska originally, like where you grew up, and what was your early life like? Were you a big reader, young? Did this come
Yeah.
later? Where did the writing come from?
Yeah. I mean, the short version is that we grew up, like my parents came to, well, I was actually born in Iowa, Des Moines, Iowa, which is like 2 hours from Omaha, right across the river. But we've lived in Nebraska for most of my life, either in Lincoln or Omaha. And I also, like, I never knew I wanted to be a writer, but what had happened was that as I continued down this pathway, I was thinking back to like, where did this shit come from? And I was thinking, and I was remembering, like, we grew up so poor. I remember my mom was telling me a story about how she wanted to teach me how to play the piano. And so she drew it on a piece of paper. Like, she drew a keyboard on a piece of paper, and we would just pretend like we could hear what the notes were, because we came over here, my parents came over here like right before I was born with nothing. And so we just went to the library all the time because it's like one of the few forms of free entertainment for working class, poor families. And so I just read and I just read and I just read. And I remember I was talking to my mom the other day, and she was like, Gene, I wish we could have, and now to be like, now my dad's like well off. Like, now he's like middle class, upper middle class. He's doing really well. So he's kind of been the embodiment of like the American dream or whatever. It's just worked out for him, even though it doesn't work out for many, many people. But she was talking to me and she was like, hey, I really wish I could have given you a better childhood. And I'm like, Mom, we had an incredible childhood. What are you talking about? But she's like, did you ever regret anything? And I'm like, yeah, I had one regret. And I don't know why it's still just like stuck to my ribs. And it was that, like, whenever kids would get those pieces of paper for like the Scholastic Book Fair where you had to like mark, I could never, I think maybe once I bought one book because we just couldn't afford them. And so then you would like give them that piece of paper to your teacher, and then every kid would get a stack in a couple of weeks. And I would just jealously stare at everyone's stacks of books and be like, damn, I can't even buy a book. Which I think is at the root of my obsession. Like, I have probably like 5,000 books now. Now I just buy every single, like 2 or 3 copies of every single book that I want, because I think that stems from that. But yeah, the writing thing, man, like, I just didn't write. I was like, and then I got into trouble, and I was like many young men who were sort of disenfranchised. I got involved in gangs, and we were like selling drugs and just doing wild shit. And then, yeah, almost like it wasn't doing well in high school, was on academic probation as an undergrad. And then I took this one literary journalism class, which was weird. I don't know why. I didn't go to the creative writing track. I ended up going to literary journalism because somewhere in my brain, I thought, if I'm going to try and make a little bit of money, maybe journalism's the way to go. And I took this one literary journalism class, which was essentially like creative nonfiction. And so it allowed me to kind of work those muscles or whatever. But yeah, that's when I was like, oh shit, maybe I should do this. Because that professor, Hugh Riley, who I think in the back of the book, he would hold up like the best 2 essays. He wouldn't say their names, but he would hold up the best 2 essays and read excerpts of them every single week. And my shit was up there like every single week. And I was like, damn, maybe I should do something about this. And then just, yeah, fell in love with it, went to grad school. And then, the rest is what it is. Yeah.
Where did you go to grad school?
UMass Boston.
Okay.
Boston.
All right.
Yeah.
And who did you study there with?
Osgold Melnichuk, who I did like an event with on the 19th, the day the book was released, and then John Fulton. I'm trying to think who else we studied. It was primarily them two. It was a pretty new program, which is actually one of the things that I was excited about. Yeah, man. The crazy thing is, like, I don't think Barry was teaching at that point, because that was like right before he passed. So I'm sure he was maybe in like essential retirement mode. But the thing is, Osgold and Barry taught together at Bennington. And so Osgold was like, hey man, you should definitely go reach out to him when all is said and done. And Barry passed in 2010, and then I graduated in 2011. So I was going to wait till I was done with my undergrad to go just like say hello or thank you for inspiring me. But he passed the year before I graduated. And so we actually, me, Osgold, Sven Burkerts, Amy Hempel, my buddy Mike Young, we threw an event to honor Barry in Boston that year. And everyone's like, why the hell are you throwing this event in Boston? Like, Barry Ann has no connection to Boston. But I was like, just because all these people in this room fucking love that guy. And so we threw a really great event when his collected stories came out. But yeah. It was, so I never got to meet him, never got to say any, yeah.
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 Yeah. That's so great to hear. And he really does bring so many people from so many different backgrounds and places. Like, he's, far and wide,
Yeah.
foreigners, all, people that, you know, on the streets
Yeah.
of LA that,
Well, I was gonna ask you, Mike, was when you were there in grad school, was it hard, or even maybe after the fact, was it hard to, because I think of some writers, especially who are so strong in voice, was it hard to, like, not just for you, but just for people in your program to, like, not to, like, shake his influence or like his voice in some way? Because I know that there's like a weird story where one of those trips that me and my buddy took to Oxford, we were at the bar, we were hanging out, we met these really nice girls that were in the grad program. They bought us shots and beers, we were having a good time, social. And this girl had this incredible Southern accent. And then we were like, oh, where are you from? And she's like, I'm from Michigan. And me and my buddies were like, what? Why are you talking like that? We didn't ask her straight up, like, why are you talking like that? But Michigan's even further north than Nebraska. We were like, Michigan's so far north, it might as well be Canada. And yet she had this, like, very deep Southern accent. I don't think she was doing it on purpose to, like, fake it, but I think she was just been in Oxford and then picked it up, but it just threw us off because she's like, oh, I'm from Michigan. I've only been here like 2 years or whatever in grad school. So I was just wondering if it was hard for you and your peers to, like, shake off that, or not shake off the influence, but not be too sort of like, impacted by that voice.
No, yeah, I mean, maybe that's just like at some point in the night at City Grocery that everybody has a Southern accent, like you drink enough.
Yeah.
Like, no, in all seriousness, like at some point I had to stop reading there.
Yeah, for sure.
I felt like it was just like I would just do a bad impression of him. And, I still go back to those books a lot, but, particularly when I'm, writing something, it can be really tough. But also a little bit of it, you can just open Airships and read half a page and suddenly go, all right, now I'm back to work.
Yeah, totally.
Like now, oh yeah, that's what it's supposed to be like. That's what
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was a deep influence, and I'm sure people in Oxford that knew him knew this as well. Just that, not only in the classroom was he this, amazing figure to all of us, but just as like a townsperson.
Yeah.
Barry around town was this kind of celebrity on his motorcycle.
Yeah.
It was, yeah, just like just this dude who seemed sort of invincible, and kind of, yeah, it just, but I was deathly afraid of him, to be honest. Like,
Yeah.
I was not afraid of him in a sort of, like he was a mean person. Quite the opposite. I was afraid that something I was going to say would make him not like me. I was
Sure. Sure.
2 years into the program, I would, if he came in the bookstore, I'd run out the back because I was petrified that I would say something stupid to him. But
Yeah.
yeah, and even to this day, I meet people in New York that, Barry Hannah, you knew Barry Hannah, or we'll mention him, and a litany of books and
Yeah.
young
Totally.
kids in their 20s and stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
he's great. Well, what else was I feel like I had a question in my head that just evaporated. Oh, tell me about some of the times that you've been down to Oxford. You said
Yeah.
you've been at least once, but you've been numerous
Oh,
times?
we've been a couple times. Me and my buddy, Tall Paul Hansen, we went a couple years ago. We were just, I put him on to Barry and I put him on to other stuff. He's actually, he took on the writing thing too. I almost feel bad for influencing him in that way, but he's finishing up his PhD in Florida, at Florida State. Yeah, he came to love Barry, and one day during the summer, he was just like, let's just go to Oxford and just like pay respects or whatever. And normally I don't care about that kind of stuff. Like, to me, it's all on the page. So I don't need to like go see someone's rocking chair or whatever. But I was like, yeah, you know what? Even beyond just like seeing the grave, which would be cool. Why don't we at least see the papers? Because he has those papers up at Ole Miss. And so we did. We went up there, and then we just had such a great time. Everyone was so kind to us. People were inviting us to house parties. Like, we were just two strangers, And I think, but there is a similar kind of vibe in Omaha where, I mean, like 5 years sober now, so I don't drink, I don't smoke cigarettes or anything. But when we were partying pretty hard, like we're just very social people and would invite anybody into our fold, and so that was a vibe that we picked up on in Oxford, is that we would go back and we would go back, and obviously some people would leave because they were graduating or they were just moving on. But yeah, I remember there was a house party where I met a dude, Ian, who was like talking about how he was like an ex-football player, and he like looked at the James Joyce tattoo on my arm. We just started talking about like Irish literature. We're talking about yeah, Joyce and Beckett for like 2 hours, and yeah, just such a great vibe. But yeah. So I've always had a soft spot, and every time obviously we would go into Square Books when we were there. The one of the craziest things was that when we first went, I think the first year we went, I mean, this is 2012, 2013 or something like that. And so we didn't know where Barry's grave was. It's not like there was like some secret map there. And so we walked into Square Books, and I was just like, man, I'm just going to straight up ask somebody. I know this might be a stupid way of going about it, but I'm just going to ask somebody. And I can't remember who it was, but she was a very nice woman. And she was like, oh yeah. She drew a map for us of like where Barry's grave was. And then she recognized my name because of the Barry Hannah event that I threw in Boston. She was like, oh, Gene Kwak, didn't you throw that event for him in Boston? And I was like, yeah. So it like connected us. It like felt like this kinship. And then we visited the grave, looked at the papers. And so, yeah, we've gone back quite a few times. I mean, obviously not since COVID, but I can't wait to go back. I can't wait to go back for sure, man.
Yeah, that's great. And I don't know how many times I met people there in the middle of Square Books that were coming from somewhere, looking for Barry, looking for Larry Brown, looking for William Faulkner, and so that's sort of what what Square Books is about.
Yeah, and a great record store, End of All Music, your buddy.
End of All Music, my good buddy David Swider.
Yeah, I think it's one of the greatest record stores I've ever been inside.
Second location in Jackson.
Yeah. I don't think, have I gone in? No, yeah, I guess I'm trying to remember when David switched to the Square, because most of the times we went were when it was like that small space. Yeah. And I think we've gone one or two times since he's been in the Square, but I can't remember exactly when's the last time we went, but yeah, great record store. I think it's like one of my favorite. I actually have like a bunch of their merch. Like whenever he puts out a new t-shirt, I order it and then wear it around Omaha and shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is great. And I was just telling you recently, and it's definitely a little different with all the COVID stuff, but same faces, same good people. And,
yeah.
Miss it down there and want to get back soon.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Caitlin, I think that we have reached 35 minutes. Are we?
Yeah, who's counting?
Okay.
This has been like so wonderful. It's been a long time since I've like really kind of like meditated on like what Barry Hannah means to me. So I've so enjoyed kind of like being a little fly on the wall for your conversation. And it seems like our wonderful audience has been just as wrapped up in your conversation. So I don't see any questions, but Gene, I would love for you, just as like, because it took me a while to realize this, but could you give us a little context for the title and kind of what it means?
Sure. Yeah. So the Go Home Ricky, it's kind of a twofold thing. Like the Go Home is a wrestling term that I put in the beginning of the book, just to give a little context. It basically means like to finish the match. And then obviously there are, deeper connections to like finding yourself, finding your identity, returning home. But also that people keep asking me like, was that always the name of the book? And I'm like, yeah, part of it, like, and my agent and some other people, they were like, think about maybe this option and this option. They loved it, but they were like, let's give other options. And it was one of the things where I was like, I really did, I kind of want to be steadfast on this. And most people agreed with it once, but I kind of wanted a book that almost sounded like a kid's book. You know what I mean? It almost has like a silly name. I didn't want it to sound like too literary, because even from the name of the book, you kind of get a sense that there's like tongue-in-cheek satire, you know what I mean? So even from jump, I wanted people to get like, oh, okay, this isn't, too serious. It's not taking itself too serious. So yeah.
Oh, I'm glad you stood your ground. I think it's great because it has its own little like, or for me anyway, like, go home, Ricky, and it just sticks in your head.
Yeah.
And I do kind of like, also audience, darling audience, if you do have questions, now is the time. So I want to brag on how beautiful this book is. I feel like there really isn't, many books that are coming out now that look like this, and it's just it's so thoughtful because it reminds me of those like kind of old school posters. And
yeah.
I mean, I'm just like, I'm not really saying anything significant. I just think it's a good looking book, and that's always.
I appreciate that. I mean, I'm a big book collector too, so obviously one of the early drafts, the weirdest thing is, so the cover process is it's like a fun collaborative process where they ask you for inspiration, and I sent them a bunch of old wrestling posters. Awesome. And weirdly enough, it ended up, one of the early drafts, even though it looked beautiful, it looked a lot like Barry's cover for the collected stories. Because if you look at that cover with the stars and the red, white, and blue, but the thing is, I never mentioned to the designer at all. And then I started realizing Barry's cover for that book looks like old wrestling posters. Like that's where the inspiration for whoever designed that at Grove got that inspiration from. And so I was like, all right, like I can't do that much of an homage, we can't be like that on the nose with the homage. And so we tweaked like the cover a little bit. And the designer Eli Mockett Abrams is incredible. And my editor Tracy and my agent Sarah, they all gave feedback. And and it's also just, like the paper is beautiful. Like it's just a beautiful, like it's pink on the inside, which I didn't even expect. And so like, it's a really beautiful object. And I'm super happy with it for sure.
Look how fine this is. I don't know if you can see it because I have this like bright light.
Yeah.
It's just a home run. I mean, I know I'm mixing metaphors, but it really is just beautiful. And I also kind of buried a lead because Jean was kind enough to send us signed book plates. Our little COVID workaround, since we couldn't host you in person. I've put the link in the chat a couple of times. So if you haven't already picked up this book, I would encourage you to do so. They're first editions. And we are just so proud to have this book on our shelves, and really look forward to welcoming you both back to Oxford when the world is a little more normal. Just give us a heads up. We'll kind of, we'll do the city grocery thing. You'll get the whole square book treatment. You can sign some stock in the back room if you want. So it's just kind of a piecemeal event in stages. But this has been so wonderful. And I really appreciate both of you taking an hour or so out of your evening to spend with our readers. It's really been a delight. Would y'all like to, I don't want to say last words, it sounds so ominous. But
I just want to say thank you. I just want to say thank you, Caitlin. And I mean, honestly, reading at or through Square Books has like been a dream of mine for so long. Like it, and it'll happen one day where I can actually read in Square Books.
Definitely.
And obviously, Michael knows I'm a huge fan of his work. Y'all, if you haven't read his books, they're so incredible. I mean, I have books back to like Cowboy Maloney, like pretty much everything Michael's ever written. I have the ESPN magazine that his story was in. Like I have everything that the dude's ever written. One of my favorite writers. And so I appreciate him sitting down and talking for the this like hour on a Tuesday night. So I appreciate y'all so much. And just thanks to everybody for showing up as well.
Well, thank you, Gene. And this is a great book, and I encourage everybody to go out and tell your friends. It's fucking hilarious and sad and beautiful. So congratulations, man.
Cool. Thank you, Michael.
Yes,
thank you.
Absolutely. Congratulations. All right. So there's never really an easy way to wrap these up. So I'm just going to push the big red button. But I hope to do this again soon, preferably not through a Zoom screen. But in the meantime, take care and stay in touch. And all right, I'm pushing the button. Bye.